Testing, testing. I see Tom in the chat already. Let me know if the sound is good. See, Farsight, you were pipped by Tom tonight, although you're usually the first person. So let me know if the sound's okay, guys. Sounds okay, guys? It sounds good. All right, welcome everybody to CanHammer TV. On April 9th, it is week 4 of the end of current life, and we are here. It's been pretty crazy. The world is crazy. Everything's crazy. Yeah, it's just everything's kind of crazy right now. Sounds a bit low. Let me see if I can just turn that up a little bit for you guys. All right. So I hope everybody's staying safe, staying healthy, staying inside, staying 2 meters from each other, staying away from work, staying away from everything, basically. Hope everybody stays away from everything and lives by yourself in a little bubble, because that's what it's going to take, it seems. However, you know, had lots of thoughts recently that this can't last forever. We cannot live like this. The country cannot survive like this. People can't survive like this. The economy can't survive like this. The healthcare system can't survive like this. So at some point, we're gonna have to just say, fuck it. We gotta work, gotta go do our stuff. And if we get sick, we get sick. And you know, if we all get sick in the end, then we'll get some herd immunity. You know, for now, we'll stick with what we're doing, but I can't see this. I can't see everybody surviving 2 more months of this. And not because of boredom, because, you know, whatever. There's worse things in life than to be bored or have too much time for hobby. It's the things that matter, you know, healthcare, economy, you know, mental health. Being bored is not being mentally ill, I'm afraid, although some people think it is. So we'll see how it goes. But hopefully we see the top of that curve at some point and we can start to come down the other end. Anyway, I hope everyone's staying safe. Don't want to spend too much time talking about COVID. I hope everybody's getting a shit ton of hobby done. I myself have been plugging away at these freaking bikes. I think they look really good. So if you're not in the Discord, you can certainly join our Discord. The link's right there. That's an up-to-date link as of 10 minutes ago. But I've been working on my SEER Council, and so my bikes are kind of done except for the jewels. But I'm pretty happy with how this has turned out so far. So it's yellow and black, and then I've got the stripe there, and then down the side I've got the Eldar runes there. It looks pretty sweet. So it's pretty cool. And then I'm starting my riders now. They're going to be like a cobalt blue color, Prussian blue color, with going to paint it exclusively with airbrush as part of my hobby goal, of course, this year. So they're looking pretty good, and things are going pretty good on the hobby front. Of course, all that may go away starting at midnight tonight. Possibly one of the biggest video gaming events since the 90s. Final Fantasy VII Remake releases tonight at midnight. Yes. Final Fantasy VII originally was one of my first PlayStation 1 games when I was in first year med school, living in a house with 3 other guys, second year med school. And we got a PlayStation, Final Fantasy VII. It came in a little CD disc with 4 discs in it. Blew my mind, that game. And it was just amazing, so I'm so hyped for this. And people are like, it's not the same, they changed it, they changed the story, not the same. Doesn't matter, just who cares? Treat it like a new game that has amazing IP, basically. And just, just, especially if you haven't played the original, don't listen to the haters, just play it as a new game. Square makes great games, just take it as that, another great game. It's not a sequel to anything, even though it's a 7. It doesn't follow any story. Just play it as a new game, and I'm just gonna love it. So there may not be much hobbying done after midnight tonight. However, I can still promise you streams, and we'll keep these things going. Maybe we'll stream some Final Fantasy VII Remake. Not sure how to do that. I have to like somehow plug my PlayStation up to my computer or something. I don't know. Maybe somebody help me figure that out. But that would be cool. So anyway, yes, big event coming up tonight. And we need big, joyful events these days. Other than Doug Ford looking sad. And so anyway, we're not going to talk too much. I just want to give a big shout out to Dan at Red Dragon. Not only is he one of our sponsors, but that guy has been working hard to get people their hobby goods. He, even though the store is basically closed, he's been driving around delivering goods to people's doorsteps all the time. So if you live anywhere in Eastern Ontario, basically, because he's been driving up to like crazy places, he can get it to you. So give Dan a shout at Red Dragon. So big shout out to Dan for keeping things going, keeping people supplied with hobby goodness. Shout out to all my colleagues at work, all the people driving buses and in the supermarkets and at the shoppers and stacking things at Staples and at the bulk barn today. Shout out to everybody. They're the real heroes. I'm not really a hero. I'm not saving anybody's lives. I'm just doing E&T stuff. And but everybody's working hard to stay safe and keep people healthy. So shout out to everybody. We're not going to spend too much time talking about other things tonight because tonight is a big episode. This is episode 13, funnily enough, and we are going to talk tonight about some things that have been very highly requested. We're going to talk about deployment and all the things to do with deployment, including castling and when to break castles and all these sorts of things. And we're going to talk about early game movement. And this is a pretty important episode, maybe one of the most important in terms of actual play tactics. If you don't deploy right or you don't move early, you make mistakes in movement phase early in the game, you're probably going to lose. So it's very important to start the game well early so you can give yourself a chance to win later. Custodes is not an army where we just table people in the first 2 turns. We have to play the long game, win by small margins, and be very meticulous and careful. So hopefully people will find this episode useful. Hopefully I remember to impart everything that I know. I've written notes, so hopefully I will remember everything. If I don't, I'll either patch it in or people can ask me questions and we can fill it in. But hopefully episode 13 will be good and people find it useful. And of course, I'd like to know your feedback. Let me know if you enjoyed this episode or the series. Let me know what you think. Give me feedback in terms of what I can do better, what I can stop doing, what I should start doing. Please let me know. I really got nothing else to do right now because I can't play games. Making this is kind of my passion project right now. So do let me know how I can make it better. Shout out to people in stream. We've got Tom from the UK, Farside, of course, Chris Musso, welcome, Sean Stryker, and of course the George joining us all the way. Okay, so we're going to jump right into it. We are going to spend most of our time in the overhead tabletop view, but I'll just give you a quick outline of what we'll be talking about tonight, and hopefully in a decent order. First, what we're going to do is talk about deployment and how to castle. And I'm going to do a deployment for you on the tabletop. Unfortunately, castling is probably our best way to deploy. Even if we're only 18 inches away and going first, we just don't have the luxury these days against many armies to deploy on the line and go for it. There may be exceptions to that. Maybe if you're playing orcs or you're playing a gun line and they don't have much space to hide, like in a Pointy Dawn of War or whatever. There may be exceptions, but generally we are a castling army now, and we have to play it safe and conservative. So we're going to talk about how to deploy in a castle. And then one thing we're going to cover as we go through is aggressive play versus defensive play. When to be aggressive, when to be defensive. I'll say as a general rule, if you're trying to decide whether you want to be aggressive or defensive, unless the aggression is going to win you the game, which generally in the early game is not going to, then you should choose to be defensive. All right. If there's a choice between aggression and defensive, at some point early in the game, you should generally choose to be defensive, unfortunately, just as a general principle. Okay, as part of deployment, we're going to talk about deep striking or not. I think we've covered that before, but we're going to just go over it again. Units that can deep strike, should you deep strike or not? There are different things you need to think about in that decision. Just because you have Terminators doesn't mean you should always deep strike them. We're going to talk about the general principles you got to think about when you do your deployment. Your path to victory, what's your opponent's path to victory, terrain, the mission, all that sort of thing. We're going to talk very quickly about how to use your deployment to change the deployment type. That was maybe a little bit more relevant in the old ITC, less so in the new ITC, but still can be a useful skill to have and to practice. We're going to talk, as requested, about auras and how to stay in auras, especially as you move. We're going to talk about when to break the castle, how to break the castle, planning ahead, how aggressive to be. And then we might just touch on, if we have time, on specific deployments or strategies against specific army types that you might be facing. So gun line, stuff like that. If we got time. It's a lot to talk about tonight, so we'll see if we got time. We can always do that as another episode. And as a separate topic in another episode, we're going to talk about moving and covering your characters. And I think a really good example of that was in the game against Jean, which I think was the last game on the stream, where I had to move my Guardians in such a way to make sure that a fast-moving tank would not be able to pick off my shield captain. So this is something that's a thing that you just have to have in your mind when you're moving. It's not difficult to do, but you have to be thinking about it. Okay, let's go to the tabletop. As always, if people have questions, please post it in the chat as we go. I'll try and answer them as we go, as long as they're not completely off topic somewhere. All right, here we go. Turn that off and boom. Okay. So here is a typical ITC table with LVO type terrain. This is the tables that we play with here, and you know, I suspect that if and when we ever get to play Warhammer tournaments again, people will be starting to model their tables after LVO terrain, Nova terrain, or they don't have much terrain at all, probably. So like pro tabletop style. So these are the kind of like the 3 terrain archetypes, or ETC style. So I think people will generally try and gravitate towards one of these types of terrain. Anyway, you basically have 2 big ruins and you know, hills. They put hills in the corners, but I put ruins in the corners because the hills suck. And then you have these sort of walls that just kind of stick up. I can't remember if these walls are supposed to be here, but anyway, or I think it might be like this. I can't remember. Whatever. So this is a you know, Dawn of War type deployment. Okay, and this is, I didn't measure it, but this is usually 18 inches between the front of the rune to the other rune. Okay, so this is probably the best deployment for Custodes. This or maybe table quarters. So whenever possible now in ITC, you want to try and get those deployments. So 2 out of 6 is not bad, because I think now you get to like roll 2 dice, or you get to reroll 1 or whatever. But generally you want to not deploy on Dawn of War. Okay, that's not good. Even pointy Dawn of War is not that great. And Vanguard Strike is probably okay, but it's less than ideal. So definitely you don't want to have Dawn of War or pointy Dawn of War. Those 2 out of 6 you want to avoid. But we're going to show you in a second when we talk about that, how to turn Dawn of War into a Vanguard or table quarters to your advantage. Okay, so generally the first thing we're going to talk about, of course, is how to deploy in a castle. Castling is very simple. Since you have a rune in the middle, and hopefully you do, you just put everything in this rune. Ideally, towing or in cover for +1 save. Then you don't even need to use prepared positions because you really want to preserve your CP. So that's what you do. So I've got my Alaris concept list here out, just a list that I can show. So what I normally do would be to place my Guardians here. Okay, so I'm going to place them in the bottom level, but I'll just put them on top for illustrative purposes. So I put my big unit of Guardians here, all along the front of the rune, and they're the front of my shield, basically. Okay, they're like, you know, my screen. Okay, so there's 8 guys there. They're forming the front. Okay, and then I tuck my characters in behind. So I've got my shield captain on bike. Okay, and then I've got Valoris. All right, and then I've got one or both of my Vexillas. Now, if you have a list that has, if you're playing double Vexilla and you have the points, you could actually put Terminator armor on one of your Vexillas and it can drop in. And then you wouldn't have to worry about it. He would be right next to your homered unit and just drop in and still give his aura. So that's useful. That's probably the only useful thing about having an Alaris Vexilla is if you have 2 Vexillas. Okay, otherwise you just put them in there. Try and put the Vexillas close to the front so they can move as far as possible in later turns. And then you got your 2 other Guardian units. Generally, they form the back here. Maybe, depending on where the objectives are placed in some missions, you may be able to get them on an objective or close to an objective. But that's basically your deployment. And then you still have, you know, 2 units to either deploy or deep strike. So I got 4-man and a 6-man Alaris. So now is probably a good time to talk about deep strike. When do you deep strike and when do you need deep strike? Okay, so what is the advantage of deep striking? Automatically, if you have to pay a CP to deep strike something, or God forbid 3 CPs to deep strike 2 units, which you definitely shouldn't, then you got to think about the opportunity cost. If you're just running Terminators, then that's fine. It doesn't cost you anything. You just have a free decision. But if you have to spend a CP, you really got to know what you're spending that deep strike for. So what does deep strike allow you to do? Well, it allows you possibly to move forward in the game, okay? Because you don't have to walk, you can just deep strike in. It may allow you to homer, obviously. So homer is, yeah, I'm going to talk about George. So homer is probably one of the best stratagems in the game. I don't think of any other stratagem that gets you guaranteed within 3 inches charge. So definitely, if you think you're going to have the opportunity to homer, which you generally do in most games, then you should put a hammer unit as your homer in unit. Okay, so generally I will place my big Terminator unit or big hammer unit, and that could be bikes or it could be a guardian unit, into deep strike for homer. Even if you end up homering in your own zone because you've been pushed, okay, by horde armies, that's still worthwhile because you can still come in, you can be safe, and then you can come in with a 3-inch charge and really wrap and do some damage. It's probably still worth it. Now the real question is, if you're running 2 hammer units, then what do you do with the second hammer unit? Do you homer that? Do you deep strike that as well, or do you deploy? And that's where your decision points comes in. What do you want that unit to do? This 4-man Alaris unit, I want maybe to do shenanigans. So if the opponent allows, or to keep them honest, because then they have to keep screening because there's going to be 4 Terminators dropping in. You know, you don't want 4 Terminators dropping in a back objective on your zone, or dropping in to pick off some characters or to touch tanks at the back, right? So you got to keep honest if you have that threat. So just deep striking them, that's one advantage of doing that. Secondly, it does allow them to get into your opponent's zone in, like, say, turn 3, when things have gotten a bit messier, okay? People's armies tend to get messier as they move and respond to threats, and they may leave you gaps, especially if you've got a 3 or 4-man unit. So that's always a threat to have in your back pocket. And, you know, for the first 2 games, a 4-man unit of Alaris sitting in your zone is not going to do anything. It might just get shot and die. So it's another good reason to deep strike that unit as well. It's very unlikely you're going to have the CP or the wherewithal to homer in both units, and it's probably not worth doing. So that's not a good reason to deep strike. The other reason to be careful about deep strike is if you're playing horde armies. So horde armies are probably going to become more popular. Orcs, Tyranids, you know, Guard, GSC, any army that can cover space. And I also put in there things that deny homer. So infiltrators, Space Marine infiltrators, the GSC thing that stops you from dropping within 12, anything or significant amount of interceptor. These are all deterrents to deep strike. So if someone's playing 3 infiltrator squads and they've parked them here, here, and there, and they're in ruins and you can't get to them easily, you probably don't want a deep strike. And if you look back at one of my games against early Raven Guard, that was exactly what I did. I started everything on the table because I knew that I would be stuck deep striking at least 12 inches away, so there's really no point in doing that. And they would be more of a threat being on the table. So that's a second reason not to deep strike, is if you need that on-table threat. Here's a unit of 6 Terminators in this ruin, right where these guys are. If you come anywhere within 12 inches of these guys, 12 to 15 inches of the front of this ruin, you're getting smacked by them next turn. You can virtually control the middle of the board by being safe in your ruin with a big hammer unit like that. People have to think very carefully about that. Same thing if you have Terminators, if you've got Deathwing, if you've got Bullgrins. That's what those bully units are for, to hold the middle, and you can do that without physically standing on the middle. So that's another reason to start on the board. Another reason is, and this is a more nuanced reason, Custodes is an army of few units. I have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 units and characters. You can sometimes make your opponent's job easier and their target priority easier if you give them less things to shoot at. So for example, if I only start with 1 unit on the board, that's an easier target priority than if I started with 5 units on the board. And this is not always the case, so it's a case-by-case basis. But if you're going to be taking fire because there's nowhere to hide, you may not want to just put everything into deep strike. So in most armies, putting things you don't want to get shot into deep strike is a good thing to do. However, in your army, since you have so few units, you may actually be better off giving the opponent a harder decision about what to shoot. Now, your opponent still may make good decisions, but at least you're giving them a chance to make bad decisions. Whereas if you just put 1 unit on, everything else in deep strike, and it's really easy then for your opponent to decide what to shoot. So that's another reason sometimes to stay on the board. Tom says, what if I walk up a shitty unit I don't mind you killing? Do you jump out and deal with it? Well, we're going to talk about that later when we talk about early game movement. But generally, when you castle, that's what you're doing. You're putting most of your army in this ruin so that, and you got to check your lines of sight with projected movements, okay? Very important. Don't just put it in the ruin and leave it. You got to make sure there's no line of sight after the first turn of movement. And then deep strike 1 and or 2 units. If you're going to start your, say, 4-man on the board, then just start it back here or wherever. It doesn't matter. There's very little shooting in the game these days that can kill a significant amount of 1-up save with -1 to hit and invulns like this. Maybe Manny Chima's list, but that list probably doesn't exist anymore. So, there's very little. A basilisk might kill 1 guy, even with straight 3 damage hitting on 3s. Non-buffed up basilisks, not going to do that much. Thunderfires these days, not going to do much against you. So there's not a lot of indirect fire shooting. Night spinners won't do anything to you. So that's a safe way to start the game. And then you go second. You always go second. Yeah, Grey Knights, it depends on where he starts. Grey Knights is an X factor, but even Grey Knights, you're still on 1-up save and -1 to hit. So, you won't get tabled by Grey Knights with out of line of sight shooting on 1 turn. Okay. So that is basically deployment. Now, what do you do if you have a different army? Let's say you have bikes. Okay, so instead of 6 Alars, you've got a 5-man bike unit. Okay. So what I like to do is I like to start my bikes on the in the ruin as the screen. actually. Bikes are good screen. They're our toughest unit to kill. You know, 4 wounds, T6, 4 up invuln. They're our toughest unit, and they can get tied up. So they have all the prerequisites you want as a screen. Obviously, you start them on the ground floor, but I like to use them as a screen if you have the opportunity. Otherwise, you just gotta try and hide them. You could deep strike them as well for a CP. It's usually something nice to deep strike, but the bike's got enough mobility to not need to deep strike, and actually maybe better on the table if they cannot be shot. Can be better on the table than deep struck generally. So that's what I do with bikes normally. Use them as a screen or put them hidden nearby. And then the other thing that sometimes variations people have in their armies is tanks. So let's say you got a couple of Custodes tanks here, or you're running 3 Custodes. Well, then you don't have too much space. What you can do, of course, is just put one back here and hide 2 behind this big wall there. Okay, if you have 1 or 2, you can hide them behind this wall pretty easily. You can easily fit 2 Custodes tanks back here. Okay, there may be angles by which they can be shot though. Okay, if you have 2 tanks, of course, you could just put it like this. Okay, so it's not too hard to hide a Custodes, and of course they're so fast and they don't suffer penalty for moving. There's no reason to leave them out in the open. You can always try and hide them. Okay, you can even put it back here, right? And then next turn it flies into aura range before it shoots. They don't have to start within 6 inch of the rerolls. They just have to get there, and they can easily most of the time. Same with palace tanks. All those things is the same principle. Okay. So that's basically deployment. And deep striking, yeah, I think the real thing about deep striking is, what are you trying to achieve by deep striking? Don't just deep strike because they're Terminators and they deep strike. You really got to think about it. Don't just deep strike for the sake of deep striking. And the nuance there to remember is, are you making it easier for your opponent by deep striking? Okay. Especially since you can't come into the second turn, you may actually, and then if you do that also, you generally can't be aggressive, because if you are, now you're really giving only part of your army to your opponent at a time, and you're feeding it to him piecemeal, and you can take it apart easier. That is definitely something that's happened to me in the past. Okay. You have to consider, when you deploy, what we like to call the path to victory. How are you going to win this game? And that will determine some of your deployment, but also determine your aggression levels, how aggressive you're going to be versus how defensive you are, and how you move early in the game. Now, your path to victory is decided by many things. First of all, your opponent's army. What is their path to victory? What are they trying to do to you? Is determined by the mission, okay? Where are the objectives? Is determined by the terrain. Where can you hide? How can you move forward while staying safe? Are the objectives near terrain or not near terrain? So all these things come into your thinking as you're thinking about how you're going to win this game. And that will determine how aggressive you are. So for example, if you look back at my last game against Jean, so basically this was kind of the table. I set up my list exactly like this with my Terminators in space, and he had tank commanders and a whole bunch of guardsmen and some out of sight basilisks and stuff like that. And so his path to victory was to rush all his guardsmen up, get double scoring on recon and grab all the objectives, and then hold out. That was his path to victory. There was no other way that he would win this game. He could not win by sitting back, and that was the way he was going to win this game. And then if I came out, his plan was then to use his tanks and shoot me to bits, which was a good plan. My path to victory was realizing his path to victory would be to hide until he came close enough in order to get his recon and all that stuff, then come out and wrap the shit out of everything and never get shot. So my goal for that game was to never get shot. It turned out I only got shot twice. Never get shot and eventually get to his tanks and game over. In the meantime, before that happened, I would just sit where I was and do nothing. And so that was my general path to victory. So how did I make that happen with the deployment? Well, I castled in the middle and I deep struck the other stuff that I didn't need until second or third turn, because I knew I wasn't going to be doing anything in the first turn. And other than the basilisk blinking at me, he had nothing to hit me with. So just wait for him to come to me. So that's the path to victory. If you are playing a mech army, you've got 3 land raiders and 3 Custodes and a flyer, then your path to victory is very different. You're going to fly forward and shoot the shit out of everything, almost regardless of what the opponent does. So in which case then you deploy on the back line, out of range of everything, and then just fly forward. So these are different ways of winning the game, but I see often I watch players just deploy. They may be thinking about first turn. That's a good first step. Think about what you're going to do in your first turn. Think about what your opponent's going to do in the first turn. But really, you got to think beyond that. You got to think the whole game, at least half the game, until you start to have to make decisions. You got to start to look ahead. And that's one of the things that I've learned a lot over the last year, especially with coaching, is just you got to have a plan in your head of how you're going to win the game, not just how you're going to play each turn. Okay. Aggression. Okay, so Tom asked earlier, what happens if we got a bunch of losers coming up the middle? Okay, so let's get some losers. Here we go, just gathering some losers here for you guys. All right, let's say we're playing, you know, some mission. There's an objective in the middle in most missions these days. Okay, and, you know, Tom's playing a guard list, or somebody's playing a guard list. I'm going to keep singling Tom out. And they've pushed up a unit of guardsmen, quote unquote, to hold this objective, okay? And that's probably fine. It probably gets them hold more. It probably gets them bonus. And they're controlling the middle of the board. Maybe up a little bit more just to get recon, okay? So this is a nice board position for the guard player, okay? And whatever, if it dies, then, you know, it's like 40 points, it's a guard unit, no big deal. And it's potentially a lot of points. So let's say this is first turn, okay? So what do? Is this bait or is it not bait? Well, it is kind of bait. Okay, there's no doubt about it. Is baiting you to come out into the open and take these guardsmen out. Is it also for a purpose? Well, yes, it's going to get him hold more, bonus, you know, and maybe the hold, like, it serves a purpose as well as being bait. It's actually a pretty good move because you probably have 100 other guardsmen to replace them. So what do you do as a Custodes player? Do you sit here and let them score those points, or do you go out on your first turn? Let's say you deep struck, okay? So you've committed, you know, a good half of your army or 40% of your army into deep strike that can't do anything till the next turn, and you have this decision to make in your first turn, okay? Now, your decision may also be influenced by what secondaries you picked, okay? So if you can keep up with him on a turn-by-turn basis, point-wise, and you really got to get into the habit of calculating this round by round. How many is he going to score? Okay, so he scores bonus, hold more, he's not going to kill anything, and he scores 2 secondary points. So he's going to get 5, and I'm going to score kill 1, hold 1, and 1 secondary point. So 5-3. A 2-point deficit after doing nothing in your first turn is not bad for Custodes, okay? So you got to do that math in your head, and then you got to be like, okay, so what am I going to do? If I come out at these guys, what's my plan? Am I just going to stand in the objective and wipe them out? Well, no, because then that unit just did that is gone, okay? And then, or mostly gone, and that's not a good trade, okay? Even for 2 points on the first turn, that's not a good trade. If that was in the 6th turn to win the game, then that's a good trade. But it's different when you just started, okay? Now, if you can come out and wrap these guys and not get retaliated on, then that's probably a good play. However, what you don't want to do is just move a unit and put it out into the middle of nowhere and with no support out in the open. Okay, you cannot throw your units away like that, no matter what it is that you kill in the end. And if you do that, whether intentionally or by accident, you better make sure you achieve what you intended. So if somebody puts like a possessed bomb here and you move 5 guardians out to take it out, you're not going to be taking out shit, and you're just going to get wrecked. So that is definitely a mistake. But you have to take it on a game-by-game basis. So you have to take the whole board state, but these kind of bait moves, you have to think very carefully about aggressive versus defensive and what comes into your decision. So what will you achieve? What if you do it? What will your opponent achieve if you don't? And how does that change the balance of the round or the game? What turn is it? Okay, is this round 1 or is this round 4, 5, 6? What's the board state? What's the score state? All these things come into mind. Think ahead 2-3 turns. What's going to happen? When are my reinforcements coming in? What's the rest of my army going to do when I do this? If you just move one unit, that's different from if you're going to push out your whole army, right? And then what's the math? Can my unit kill whatever it is that I'm going to kill? Like, what is the math? What is the likelihood of me accomplishing what I want to do? So, and you have to think about all these things before you commit that move. The temptation to be aggressive is way higher when you got these bros. Okay, when you got 14-inch moving bikes with spears sticking out their asses, especially there's a little guardsman unit there, the temptation to be aggressive with bikes is high, okay? And they are the real unit that often you have to play more defensive than you would like, at least until second, third, fourth turn. They're tough, but they're not that tough these days. In the old days, maybe you could shoot your 18 bikes down at somebody and half the time you would win and half the time you'd lose. But these days, you're probably just going to lose the bikes. So bikes, you really got to think hard about what you're trying to achieve with the bikes. And it's really tempting to put them out here. They're going to kill these guardsmen. You're going to lose a couple of bikes in the next turn. No big deal. I still have 3 bikes. And then continue to just push the 3 bikes into your opponent's zone until they die. Take as many people with you before you die. While that sometimes works and is super tempting and heroic, it often is not the right move because these guys are expensive and you cannot afford to throw them away. If you do that and you happen to survive with few casualties, it's usually the better move actually to then push them back or get them into cover or do something not so aggressive. The other thing that's easy to bait bike players out with is like a character standing somewhere, and you really got to think, why is that character there? Is that character really that important? Do I need to kill it? Is that just bait? So bikes are easily baited. Bike players are easily baited. So don't be baited if you're playing bikes. Okay. Yeah, and as I said right at the beginning, generally defensive play is a little bit more, has more longevity than aggressive play. The days are gone now where we can be super aggressive because we're just not that hard to kill anymore. So many people can kill us in so many ways. So you just have to play defensively and wait for your opportunity. Sometimes I do nothing for 2 turns and I score nothing, just a hold and maybe a kill, and then third turn I score like 8-9 points. So you have to think about that. The game is 6 turns long. It's not 4 turns long. And you only need 4 turns to score all your secondaries if you picked well. So sometimes you just have to bide your time. And that is the hardest thing to learn. And that is the hardest thing to actually do because everybody just wants to go kill some shit. But that can be really difficult to do it, but you got to just keep thinking to yourself. And as I said before, if you have a decision to make between being too aggressive and defensive, then I would choose defensive almost always. Okay. Just a quick thing about auras. So one thing that I used to do a lot, especially when playing bikes, but I used to do regardless, is auras, staying in your aura. Especially the banner, and especially after you charge. So here's my Vexilla, okay? and he is currently within 6 of this biker, okay? But you're like, let's go kill some guardsmen, and you do your charge, and you're like, oh yeah, I'm in. And then lo and behold, when it comes to your opponent's shooting phase next turn, you have outranged your Vexilla, okay? Or you charge in, and now you're out of Valoris range. And if you're trying to kill a knight, you need every reroll you can get. So you gotta be mindful at all times of where your auras are and how you're going to stay in the aura, okay? And you don't need the aura on your turn, but you need it in the next turn, and you can't move between charging. So you gotta just keep in the aura, and often, especially with bikes, you can just change the base orientation so you can still get your attacks in and still be within yeah, see it, Tom, and still be within aura range. So you always got to keep your aura. How do you stay in auras? By always having them in your head, okay? That's how you stay in auras, by always having it in your head. Bruce Gordon, welcome. So another thing people ask me about constantly is tanks. How do you move your tanks and still stay in the aura? Okay, well, here's how. Easy. So here's my Vexilla, okay? And I've got my 2 tanks. So Custodes tanks are a bit obnoxious. You measure from the hull, not to the base. So you can do all sorts of things like this, okay? And as long as the tip of the Custodes is within range, it has a big profile, it can see, and it can still be in the aura. Okay, so actually, if you're measuring the aura of the Vexilla to the Custodes tanks, you can be that far apart, and you're still just within 6. Okay, same with Valoris or whatever, your captain or whoever. So it's actually pretty easy. You can cover a good 3/4 of the board and still be within 6 of the Vexilla when you have big tanks with obnoxious little U-shapes like this, okay? So just keep that in mind. It's actually fairly straightforward, and they move so fast that they can almost always stay in reroll or Vexilla range or both, okay? All right, let's talk about turning the deployment. All right, just give me a second here. Just gonna remove these guys. If anybody got questions, please ask while I'm jigging around here. All right, guardsmen, you're out. Okay, let's just rejig for a minute, just very loosely. Just do the middle bit. Okay. Okay, so now we've got Dawn of War, everybody's least favorite deployment, almost everybody's least favorite deployment, Dawn of War. So as a army with so few models, Dawn of War is the worst. You cannot cover enough of the space. You cannot get to every objective. You can be spread out too thin and get hit. And if you castle in the middle, you're giving up 90% of the board. Whereas the other way, you're really only just giving up half or maybe 60% of the board. So it is probably the worst deployment. Vanguard is better because of the long corners. You know, table quarters is fine because you control whole quarter. These pointy hammer and anvil are fine. It's Dawn of War is the worst. So what do you do? Well, and then you can be attacked from all sides. So that's hard. You can just, of course, castle up in the middle and hope for the best. But if your opponent's smart, they can spread things out and you will never interact with things in opposite corners unless you split, and almost always splitting is a bad idea, okay? But what you can do if you have the opportunity, and this doesn't always apply, but you can use how you deploy to change the deployment, basically. You can spin a Dawn of War into a Vanguard strike by deploying in one corner, basically, okay? And now that it's all deploy, not alternating deployment, and you know who's going first and deploying second, you can actually, it's actually fairly easy to do that. So let's say it's Dawn of War and your opponent deploys everything in that corner, in their rune. Then you could turn it this way or this way, whichever way you want to your advantage, okay? If they deploy everything over there, then you can either deploy here and be very close generally not a useful idea. Or deploy back here, and now you've turned Dawn of War into Vanguard Strike, okay? Basically. So, or you could start here if you're not going to face a lot of shooting, and now you've turned it into a table quarters with you on the aggressive side. So you can use your deployment to change the deployment type, and that's way easier now. In some ways, a lot easier now with the new ITC missions and the way you deploy. So just remember that you're not beholden to the deployment sometimes, and Dawn of War is the worst deployment for sure, or Pointy Dawn of War, same thing. Okay, cool. Okay. So, when to break the castle. Okay, we're going to go back to this way. So as I already mentioned, you don't break the castle till you have to. Don't be baited. Don't break the castle till you have to break the castle. Okay? And then the question comes, well, how am I going to get my Vexilla into position? Okay? Well, your Vexilla starts there. Okay? And on the second turn, if you're coming in second turn, or third turn, all right, you can move to there, the middle of the table, okay, and then advance all the way up possibly to there. And then it's a 6-inch deep strike within 6 inch. So actually, he can cover 3/4 of the table in one turn, okay? So I don't worry about it, okay? Don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. And that's assuming your opponent has stayed all the way at the back, which most opponents don't. I've yet to face an opponent who just stayed at the back like I stay at the back. They tend to get frustrated and come at you, okay? Use that to your advantage. But even if they do, you're good, okay? And if they don't, then you're good, you're even better, okay? Sometimes you don't even have to move, or you have to move back, okay? So don't worry about not being able to get the Vexilla where you need to get it. It's gonna be fine, okay? And from the tip, in most deployments, the tip of the ruin, if you're playing LVO style, you can get almost anywhere, okay? It's not a big deal. So that's the thing. And then in terms of when you start to move out, you need to move with purpose, okay? Don't just move stuff out for the sake of moving out. You need to move to accomplish something. Get on the middle objective, wrap a unit, kill this unit, wrap that unit. You need to start often in your third turn when you start to move out. Now you need to start scoring kill more, hold, maybe hold more. Bonus is definitely a possibility these days with new ITC, and getting your secondaries. So you got to move with purpose, okay? And that's when you start to be aggressive, because now the game depends on it, okay? So often you can castle for a couple of turns, but then from the third turn on, you gotta go, okay? That's when you do your homer, that's when you drop your units in, that's when you're being aggressive. Keeping in mind, protect your characters, okay? Stay in your auras, stay together, don't split, okay? Especially if you're playing bikes, the temptation for the bikes is just shoot forward and go off on their own. Try not to do that. You can if you have to. They'll survive for a little bit, but you know, if you can stay together, it's always better. So generally, that's when you probably turn from defensive to aggressive, is at the top of 3, okay, or third turn, if you haven't had to do it already because of what your opponent does. So the question of when to break the castle, well, it's not really a solid answer, but generally, you know, second or third turn. You cannot wait till the fourth turn, because you would not have been scoring secondaries, and it's too late. Third turn is the latest when you break the castle. Second turn, if you're forced to break in the second turn, or if your opponent has presented to you a great opportunity. So let's say you're playing 4 knights, and he moves 2 knights right here, and in your second turn, you can move forward and kill both knights. Well, yeah, I would probably do that. But, you know, that's just capitalizing on mistakes. Okay. Anybody have any questions on that so far? So let's just set up this scenario again. With my duders here. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, and my Vexilla is right in there. with Trajan and my other Vexilla, and my shield captains back here, and then I've got these rando dudes here. Okay, and it's their turn. You know, my opponent is somewhere in the middle of the table, so how do you move out? Okay, well, the best way to move out is now you assert your control of the table. So you move my big foot unit. I'm going to move straight out here onto this objective, okay? And there's two things I need to consider. What are they going to do? Generally, they're going to fight whatever's in the middle here and wrap, okay? That's kind of a goal. Otherwise, they're going to take up space and try and survive, okay? Two things to consider. First of all, they need to be kept in Vexilla range, okay? But that's okay. The Vexilla is moving right up, so not only can buff them, but it can homer. And then Valoris, if there's no snipers, can also move out, okay? That's fine in my other Vexilla as well. Okay, so that's a nice little... hey, LV, welcome. Yeah, I'm just playing by myself, man. Playing Golden Boys by myself. And then what do you do with your 3-man units? Well, if you're doing engineers or something, then they can just stay on the objective. But if not, they can also move out, or they can take up space. You know, whatever. It's usually an objective at the back, and engineers is a good pick generally, unless they have a lot of outline of sight shooting. And then your shield captain, though. So again, your shield captain, in my list, for example, he's the only biker. So the temptation is to be like, wow, shield captain, wow, shoo, and like go kill some shit. But again, it's usually not wise. Keep him as an extra buff and as an aggressive, you know, counter strike, okay? And then you drop your deep strike units in. So the generally, when you start to move out, you have to be decisive, and you have to have a goal in mind of how you're going to score your secondaries, hold more, maybe the bonus, and kill more, okay? You have to have these answered in your mind before you start moving. And all the while, protecting your characters, staying in aura range, okay? Towards the end of the game, staying in Vexilla range no longer becomes important, and your Vexilla often just stays in the middle here as the rest of your troops move forward later in the game, or the Vexilla is actually a candidate to go back and hold that backfield objective, or go to a side objective or whatever. So the Vexilla is actually a good candidate by turn 4, 5, 6, because you don't need them anymore to just be the guy who stands on objectives. The shield captain, 160 points, feels bad to just leave him standing on an objective, but he's really good at that. And he's really good at postman too these days, because he can move 20 inches and he's fairly hard to kill, especially if you protect him. So if you just remember where your troops are, you can protect your character as he flies around doing postman. So he's pretty good at postman, okay? So that's a good way of using your shield captain to get you 4 points, basically. Yeah, that's basically it. When you drop your Terminators, okay, remember that these guys do not move very fast. They're fast. They're fastest Terminators, you know, 6-inch moving Terminators, but that's just as fast as a normal Marine. So what you want to avoid is sending your hammer units off to the side, okay, or into like a far corner, okay. You generally want to keep them within a 12-inch diameter of the middle of the table, if you can. And your opponent, if he's smart, will try and pull your hammer units off to the side, okay. Hey David, welcome. And it's very tempting. There's a tempting target here. You know, push the tank commander back here, and so you're like, oh, I'll just put my Terminators back here, and yeah, sure, you're gonna kill that tank commander, but now those Terminators do nothing for the rest of the game. So it's always better to try and keep it in the middle if you can. And a smart opponent will try and pull your hammer units out of position because they're just slow-moving Terminators. Okay. And they don't have a lot of shooting or anything to make up for that lack of movement. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Bruce Gordon, so like the Graf tanks still or moving. So I think the Custodes tanks are fine. I think though that if you're going to invest in Custodes tanks, you kind of have to go pretty heavy into mech. So a lot of tanks. Just 1 or 2 Custodes tanks, just too easy to kill these days, and you've lost, you know, a quarter of your army. So I think that Our vehicles need to be a bit tougher, but if you are going to go vehicles, then you have to flood the table with vehicles. Either that or you go non-vehicles. I think it's just dichotomized like that because of how lethal to vehicles the meta has become. But if you're playing Cladius tanks, and we've talked about this before when we talked about the Cladius tanks. Okay, let's move all these duders here. Then once you decide to move out, you got to use your Cladius tanks like Wave Serpents. If you've ever played a good Eldar player who has Wave Serpents, those things are fucking obnoxious, okay? You got to use them like Wave Serpents, even though they're not as hard to kill as Wave Serpents. A 5 invuln is pretty good, but they move fast, okay? They can shoot no matter how far they move, 14 inches, okay? While your army's moving out, it's pretty easy to keep these guys in reroll aura range, okay? Especially with a shield captain around. You can give them the reroll ones, okay? And then, so 2 moves later, and you're already like up to here. You use them to hold objectives. You use them to tag units that you don't want shooting. Use them to eat Overwatch. Use them for all sorts of obnoxious shenanigans, turn 3 onwards. And for the first 2 turns, you leave them at the back, pegging things off. Hopefully staying out of range of anti-tank firepower. And so that's how you use Cladius tanks. LLV, hopefully everything will be okay for CCBB. If so, I'm trying to make a promise to come and help Rob do some coverage for AOS. Oh, that's great. That's great. So it's honestly not looking that good for August, but we are looking into the possibility of having CCBB in the fall. So still running it, but later rather than giving up on it altogether. So hopefully, we'll see. Nobody really knows what's going to happen right now. There's a billion models out there. Everyone's making their predictions. At the end of the day, nobody really knows. So we'll see how that goes. But we are committed to run it if we can run it safely and for people to be safe and have a good time. Interestingly enough, if you've ever been to the venue for CCBB, we probably have enough space to put at least 2 meters between every table. So you could, except for you and your opponent, you could social distance while playing Warhammer. But anyway, that's not a great way to run an event. Okay. So I think I have covered everything that I wanted to cover. So let me go back to the people have questions, please ask. Where are we now? Okay. All right. Okay, so we covered quite a lot in the last hour. We covered basically castling, deployment, deep striking versus not deep striking, staying in auras. We covered aggression versus defensive. We covered early movements, when to break the castle, how to break out of the castle. We covered a little bit about using the tanks. We covered quite a lot of ground in this episode, and I hope people found it useful. If people got questions, please ask me or ask me on the Discord later. Next week, or the week after, I might be busy next week, but the next Tactica, we're probably going to talk about, maybe go over some of the specific archetypes. So we can talk about, how you play against hordes, gun lines, stuff like that, or maybe specific army matchups. Although maybe it's not that relevant right now because nobody get to play. Who knows what's going to come out the other side of this? Assuming Engine War still gets released like beginning of May, and then our book, a month after that, like who knows, 9th, like nobody knows really what's happening right now. We still have a promised episode covering ITC secondaries, so we can certainly do that, and moving and covering characters. I encourage people to watch the whole series, obviously, of Tactica, but also to go back and watch my previous streams. You can just watch them on fast forward or just skip ahead or skip boring parts. But there's a lot of tactics and strategy covered in the games themselves against very specific types of armies. And you don't need to even pay too much attention to the specifics of who shot what and all that sort of thing. But just the general strategies. When did I move? When did I break my castle? Why did I shoot people in that order? How did I wrap that unit? Why did I decide to do that versus that? Why did I deep strike them there? Like, it's the general strategy you should take from the games, not the very specific why did that thunder fired cannon do 2 damage. Like, it's not really about the specifics after the fact. It's about the general strategies, the macro strategies. So do go back and watch those. For example, the last game against Jean was a great illustration of how to play against horde armies, how to wrap things, how to avoid getting shot. The game against Raven Guard right at the beginning was good. All the early Marine games were really tactical and super good. All these things are good things to watch and go back and watch. And of course, since they're pre-recorded, you can just fast forward them or whatever. LV, are Custodes viable? And you have no clue about 40k. Yeah, I don't like the word viable. I mean, a fetus is viable till it's dead. Everything's viable. Everything has things that are viable. If by viable you mean you can win a 6-round GT, then no. If by viable you mean you can compete and get 4-2 or 5-1, probably, if you play really well and you have a good list and you have good terrain. I still think Custodes can do well if people play well, have a good list, and there's good terrain. Yeah. Snoot DeVille, how's it going, man? Brynjar44, welcome. Dr. Cheesesteak, you're narrowing down between Custodes, Salamanders, and Raven Guard. I mostly care about aesthetics and fluff. There are 12 previous episodes. Yes, there are 12 previous episodes and 2 extra bonus episodes, and there's maybe 15 or 20 live stream games or battle reports as well. So I'd say we are the largest online repository of Custodes information right now, probably. Could probably say that with confidence. And if you want to choose aesthetically Custodes, Salamanders, and Raven Guard, well, Custodes. I mean, Salamanders and Raven Guard are basically just Marines painted different colors. Custodes, man, they're just beautiful. See, Fireside, your problem comes from deployment, threat assessment, and dealing with gun lines. So, yeah, we'll talk about gun lines, but, the principles I just talked about is really how you deal with gun lines. It's that at some point you're going to be taking some shots. But, that's what you got. But hopefully when you decide to break out, you can homer in some people to keep the gun line a bit busy. And then there's other things you got to think about with gun lines, like how to charge through terrain and to avoid overwatch and stuff like that. And every gun line is a little bit different. So we'll definitely talk about that in in maybe the next episode. Deployment and threat assessment. Well, hopefully this helps you a little bit in deployment. Threat assessment is really something that you gain from experience, from knowing what your army can do and knowing what your opponent's army can do. So if you have no idea what your opponent's army can do, you will not be able to assess what's a threat and what's not a threat. Nor will you be able to assess what you can threaten and what your opponent won't be threatened by. So you need to have that knowledge, and that comes just from playing, really. You could just memorize everybody's books, but even then you wouldn't know how combos work very well. Dr. Cheesesteak, yeah, green and emo black, yep. You end up on Planet Bowling Ball. Well, that's unfortunate. Our army kind of relies on good terrain, and, Planet Bowling Ball is unfortunate. So, yeah, I know there's not much to say about that. People just need more terrain, to be honest. Sean Stryker, you have upcoming game against Guard and Sisters of Battle. Any tips? Well, it kind of depends on what their list is. Personally, I'm not too worried about Sisters. T3, anything T3 is kind of, easy to kill. So that goes with Guard as well. Depends how many. The things that really bother me in Guard are tank commanders, especially the Relic battle cannon. That just toasts everything we have. It's really nasty. The 3 damage basilisk is pretty bad, but -1 to hit banner is so good against Guard. It still hamstrings them, making everything hit on 5s. And that's why tank commanders are still okay hitting on 4s, but hitting on 4s is much worse than hitting on 3s. So you must bring the -1 banner against Guard and keep everything always in range, because it really decreases their firepower. I haven't played. I played one game against Steve's sisters. It wasn't an optimized list. I have not played an optimized sisters list because nobody around here plays sisters. But that would be an interesting matchup. But yeah. Yeah, Steve Farsight, just sounds like you got to improve the terrain levels of your local area. Dr. Cheats there, Sisters of Silence, good to bring with Custodes. Well, not right now, but we will be able to bring them as when we get our new book. How good they will be is really a matter of speculation right now. We don't know enough, and they could be potentially very good for us, or they could be potentially useless. So we shall see. Reserve judgment till I see rules. But right now, there's no real point in bringing Sisters of Silence ever with anybody. And Sean Stryker debating between +1 attack or -1 to hit banner. If you're talking about a decision between them for Guard and Sisters, -1 to hit. If you're talking about, in general, actually I like bringing both. +1 attack is really nice. Kind of softens the blow of losing 1 or 2 models. If you've ever avenged the fallen on a unit, that's how nice attack banner is all the time. So I like to bring both, but if you had to choose, I'd still choose the -1 to hit. Brian Vod, if they have the CC Deep Striking Sisters, kill them ASAP. I can't remember who those guys are, but kill whatever ASAP if you can without being too aggressive. Okay. So for next week, we're probably going to do either a podcast or a Tactica. I don't think we have time next week to do both. We'll see what Chris is up to. If we do Tactica, we'll cover how to play against certain army types, and what I can do is probably set up a couple of these army types. I don't have I have a lot of flyers, but not all the same army. But we could do that for illustration. We can set these things up and go to town. So I have a suggestion for people out there. I've always offered for people to, if they record their games, then happy to commentate or coach people on certain bits. I'm not gonna charge people for coaching and all that shit. I mean, all this is just goodwill. So I'm happy to do that for people. These days, when a lot of people are playing on Tabletop Simulator, actually you should be able to record that pretty easily. I mean, you can just QuickTime and desktop screen record or whatever. And so maybe actually a good learning exercise or coaching opportunity for people to record their Tabletop Simulator games, and we can go over them either as a group or on here on a Tactica episode or whatever. If people send me games, or if you have played a game in person, you've recorded or whatever, that's useful exercise, just like I do go over my own game sometimes. So it's definitely nice to learn from games that you've played. Do take that opportunity if you have the chance. Otherwise, we're basically done for tonight. And I'll give people a couple more minutes for questions. And otherwise, we are good to go. No time. Yeah, funnily enough, I have no time because my daughter is home all day and I have to work and then I have to look after the daughter. So I actually have no extra time than I used to have. Because instead of working at the hospital all day now, I work at home all day. And I have to look after my daughter all day too. So the daytime is no extra time for me. And then I'm doing a lot more coverage. Like yesterday I had to cover a colleague because they were sick. And so I'm doing a lot more. We have second and third coverage now because just in case somebody goes down with symptoms, they can't come to the hospital. So there's actually, the same amount of stuff to do. There's more time in the evenings. I don't have to start work I don't have to get up at 5 a.m. anymore. So that's been nice. I don't know if I can go back to doing that, getting up at 5 a.m. to go to work anyway, once this is all finished. But yeah, it's definitely been an adjustment, but it's still been busy. Cool. So I'm going to wish everybody a good night. Stay safe, stay inside, stay away from other people. We will come out of this at some point. And do join the Custodes Discord. It's just the CanHammer Discord, of which there is a Custodes channel, but there's a lot going on the Discord nowadays, and the link is up there on the screen. Do check out the other Tactica series on the YouTube and on the Twitch. Probably the YouTube, because eventually they come off the Twitch. And stay safe, guys, and I'll see you guys next week.